Meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. As Pastor Gordon would say, aren't you glad you came to church today? All right. So this is a tough one. This is going to be a fun one, though. So if you thought that was not so upbeat, then I just want to let you know that all of us are going to die someday. Death comes to godly people and sinful people. It comes to good people and bad people. It comes to those who offer sacrifices and those who don't. A good person dies, and so does a sinner. Those who make promises die, and so do those who are afraid to make them. And if you thought that was me just being negative in my theology, that was actually words from Ecclesiastes chapter 9, so that's what we had to look forward to. So I figure if we go ahead and get that out the way, there's only up from here, okay? So the rest of the sermon will be better than the start. So why are we talking about this? Why are we doing this new sermon series, From Death to Life? What is its significance? And there's a few reasons for that. And so one is that you can completely blame all of this on me. And so Pastor Gordon is on vacation. He's going with the youth to Infuge next week. So he said, you're going to do the first couple weeks of this series, so you go ahead and plan the sermon series for July. So if you don't like this, you can completely blame me. Second thing is we're going through the book of Job. We're doing a Bible study on Job. And those of you that are in that class know how much I love the book of Job. And so when Gordon asked me to plan this, I said, Ecclesiastes, my mind was on Job, on that group of books in the Bible, and I just felt called to do this. And so I am curious as to how many of you have ever studied the book of Ecclesiastes. Yeah, not many. Okay, so that's good. Hopefully we'll learn something. So how many of you recall ever hearing a sermon on Ecclesiastes? Okay, just a couple. So outside of the very famous passage from Ecclesiastes that you probably know, where it goes through, there's a time to blank, a time to. We're talking about that next week. It's often mentioned in funerals. We don't know much about Ecclesiastes, which is a shame because it's been called the most contemporary book of the Bible. The things that are discussed in Ecclesiastes are still so relevant to today. The things that the writer, who we'll talk about in just a moment, things he expresses and the things that he's struggling with are things that we still struggle with today, and there's questions that we have asked throughout all of time. And so that's why I think it's so important to go through this book over the next few weeks. So Ecclesiastes is one of the books of wisdom literature. It's a group of books in the Old Testament that follow a certain theme. We get a lot of advice from them. It helps us explore certain questions. So I love all these books for faithful believers and also for new believers, as long as you connect it to the New Testament and Jesus Christ. So the book of Job is part of the wisdom literature, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Psalms, and the Song of Songs, which is also known as the Song of Solomon, who is the author of Ecclesiastes. And he also gave us most of the Proverbs. So a lot of those wise sayings that we turn to are given to us by Solomon. So most of what we know about Solomon comes from Book of Kings, more so 1 Kings. And so in 1 Kings chapter 2, David is dying, and so he's handing off the keys to the kingdom to his son Solomon. And then in chapter 3 of 1 Kings, then God comes to Solomon in a dream. And so Solomon is a young king. Scholars debate on whether he's between the ages of 14 and 18. Either way, he's a teenager. And all of a sudden, he is the ruler of this great kingdom. And so God comes to him in a dream, and he asks, if there's anything that you can ask of me, Solomon, what would it be? What would you like? And so that would be could be a dangerous thing for us, right? If God came to us and said, if you could have anything you want, what would it be? Now, I don't want to know all of what you might ask, but I'm just curious, what comes to mind, right? If God said you could have anything, we would ask for, I don't know, we'd ask for healing, we'd ask for maybe, better finances, whatever that may be, to kind of get our lives in order, right? But we know that we have to be careful what we ask for. That old saying. So be careful what we ask for. It reminds me of this story of, it's a couple, a married couple. They're 60 years old. They've been married for 40 years. Whew. And so, but they still love each other a whole lot, okay? And so this couple, they're walking on the beach, and they see this lamp. And so they pick up this lamp, and they rub it, and out pops a genie. So obviously this is a true story, right? So they rub this lamp, and out pops a genie, and the genie says, I see that you two love each other so much, and so I'm going to grant you each a wish. And so the genie asked the wife, what is it that you would like, anything that you would want? And she says, what, I love being on the beach so much that I wish for just me and my husband to have our own island, our own deserted island, and we just live there happily ever after. And so, poof, they're off, and they have this island. And so then the genie goes to the husband, and he goes, what is your wish? Husband goes, well, this is great and all, but I'm sorry, I just can't pass up this opportunity. My wish is that my wife would be 30 years younger than me. And the genie says, are you sure? And the man goes, absolutely yes. I'm sorry, I just can't pass it up. I hope for a wife that's 30 years younger than me. And then, poof, the man turns 90. So be careful what you wish for. If any of you men ever wish for a younger wife. So you have to be careful what you ask for. And so Solomon, answering God's question, he says, well, I realize that I'm young. I realize that I don't know certain things. And so he asked for more wisdom. He asked for wisdom and discernment. And so God said, because you asked those things, for wisdom and discernment to rule your people, and you didn't ask for something materialistic, I'm going to give you that. I'm going to give you that wisdom and discernment. I'm also going to give you those things that you didn't ask for. I'm going to give you great wealth and a good life and all of these things. So Solomon became known as one of, if not the wisest and also wealthiest people that have ever lived. And so that brings us to this passage today, this from chapter 1. So knowing that Solomon is one of the, if not the wisest person that ever lived, we believe that he wrote this in an old age, so he's taking all of the things that he's learned. He starts off pretty negative, right? This is a pessimistic book, let's just be honest. So he goes, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. So at first glance, we might read this if it's written by some undergraduate philosophy major who's coming home for summer break and, announces that the universe, we know it is pointless and life has no meaning. We may have even said something like that when we were young. But knowing that this is said by the wisest person who ever lived, we know this can't be the case. So what is the deal? So there's a couple theories as to how we can interpret this book or how we can interpret Solomon's writing or his attitude. The first is that he is upset, that he is venting. There's the idea that he is venting, that he is disappointed with his life. He has a lot of regrets, and he is disappointed with God. He is disconnected with God. He doesn't mention God until the very end of the book, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. The second theory is that Solomon is basically warning us. So he's writing from this place of he's trying to impart this wisdom on us, and he's saying, learn from me. So I tend to lean with that theory that he is, in fact, giving us advice and not just venting. But this is one of those cases where the translations have led us astray a little bit. And so you may know by now that I love looking at the original Greek and Hebrew and finding out the true meaning. And so let's take a look at the Hebrew meaning of this word, meaningless. So this Hebrew word for meaningless is Hebel or Habel, depending on it. The spelling just changes slightly depending on the usage, if it's referring to a name or not. So Habel is actually connected to the name Abel. So if you are familiar with the story from Genesis of Cain and Abel, Abel's name, we know that Abel did not live a long life, unfortunately, okay? So his brother killed him, so Abel did not live a long life. So his name literally means to be a short period of time. He did not live long. So from Abel, we get this concept, this word Hebel, which we see in Ecclesiastes, and then Solomon also references this in other of his writings. So, very short period of time or a breath. How short a breath is, how short our lives are, how short a breath is, all of this in comparison to God's eternity. So when we say meaningless, or some translations say vanity, we have to think of it as not just meaningless in what we would think of as meaningless, that has no point, but just simply saying that it is a very short period of time that goes by so fast. How do we attach meaning to something that goes by so fast? So it makes us, Ecclesiastes tells us that life is short. That's the first thing. Life is short. And so we know that even for those of us that live to be a very long time, one of my friends I grew up in youth group with, her grandma just died, and she was 106 years old. And though that's amazing, we know that's a very long time on earth, it is short in comparison to all of God's eternity. So we can look at this, we can kind of, this idea of breath or life is short, we can kind of make the comparison to a candle. Like when we blow out a candle, there's this vapor, this smoke that comes off, and we can see it, but we can't grab it, we can't grasp it, and all of a sudden it's gone. This is how we should think of this word as being just so quick. It's like a vapor. So life is short. When you think about how life is short, we may find ourselves saying that, like the saying that the old folks used to say, time flies the older you get, right? Who here has heard that or said that? Time flies the older you get. And when we're young, we hate hearing that, right? We're like, oh gosh, okay, grandma, like, all right, but I'm 16, I don't really want to hear about this. Time flies the older you get, and then we get there. So if time has already gotten a little bit quicker for me at 36, then how fast does it go by when you get older? I hear my grandma that's almost 90 say this all the time. And so if you're a senior citizen, or if you consider yourself old, I don't know what's old anymore. We'll let you guys debate on that. But if you're older and it's like you blinked and all of a sudden you're in an old body. You may find yourself still young, you want to go do certain things, but you're in an old person's body. And so this is where we come to this other reference that Solomon mentions in the scriptures using this word Habel, or short period of time or breath. And so we have a reference to Proverbs 31:30. We may be familiar with this whole passage of, a godly woman. So the things that we're looking for in a good partner, a good woman. And it says, charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting. So that word Habel, fleeting, again, just a reference to how quickly things go by, how quickly things change, and how our lives change. So I want to share with you this painting that is interesting. All right. This painting, at first glance, may seem sort of unusual, right? Mainly because of the focal point of the skull. So this is what's called an allegory of the vanities of life. This is one of the rare genres, if you will, of artwork that is related to religious scripture. So this painting was directly influenced by the passage we read today of Ecclesiastes, of all is vanity. And this was a type of artwork that's called vanitas, a Latin word, vanitas. And so in this painting, we have several things that actually refer to the scriptures, to Ecclesiastes, and also to Matthew of do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. And so we have the skull, which is a symbol of death, and it reminds us how quickly things can go by. We have the timepiece there that is open, and it's very hard to see, but there's a gold oil lamp that has a vapor has smoke going up, which symbolizes that it was just extinguished. There's a purple silk cloth to represent luxury. There's a seashell to represent a symbol of wealth and also sometimes fertility. There's a samurai sword to demonstrate power. There's books and instruments to remind us of the luxuries of life. But at the end of the day, that all of these things do not matter ultimately for our lives in eternity. This artwork is also unique because if you were to draw a diagonal line across the middle, you would see that all the objects are on one side and then the other side is completely left open. That is to represent our spiritual existence, and we have the light coming in as if it's a light connecting us to the heavens. So our scriptures today and this artwork reminds us of the frailty of life. The timepiece, the mention of sun, the sun rises, the sun sets. Time goes by every day and tells us that life is repetitive. Life is short and life is repetitive. We get up and we go to bed. We eat and we rest. And Solomon wants to remind us of these facts of life. And he tells us that there is nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. Now, of course, we know that there have been new inventions, new technologies, but what he is saying is that it doesn't mean that no new things were ever invented. What he does mean is this, that nothing new we can ever discover will break the cycle and satisfy us. He's being very blunt, he's being very straightforward in telling us this, that we keep searching for new things in life. All of us have this desire to discover what is that one thing that is eventually going to bring us satisfaction. Like the old song, I can't get no satisfaction. What is it going to be? What is that one thing that's going to be that's going to break the cycle and satisfy us? This can apply to anything. Think about some of the most amazing things we've done as a society. Space travel. First, we traveled to the moon, although some may disagree. Now we're trying to find life on Mars, where we have SpaceX, space travel. And then maybe once we do that, then we'll try to conquer the solar system and then look even further beyond that. And we'll never have our fill of discovering new things, of new accomplishments. There are different reasons why we do these things in life. There's different reasons why we long for these things, but the fact remains that whether or not you discovered something new or accomplished something great, 100 years from now, no one will know who you are. Again, aren't you glad you came to church today? This isn't me. This is what the scriptures tell us. We do the same things over and over again, and then we leave this place. And being a Christian doesn't stop this from being true. Rather, it should make us the first to stop pretending it isn't true. In all of this talk, all of this wisdom that Solomon is trying to convey, he's telling us this. Preparing to die will teach us how to live. Now, I'm not saying you go get ready in that sense, but mentally and spiritually, preparing to die will teach us how to live. Accepting death is the first step in learning to live. Wise people simply accept that they are going to die. It may seem so obvious, it's simplistic. But it's so significant when we stop and think about how much energy we devote to not accepting it, how much energy we devote to fighting aging, and how commercials and all of these beauty products play into our fear of aging. How we need to stay young because getting old is the worst thing, right? It's not. But no matter who we are, I think we all think about it. All from our own perspectives, we have fears or wonder when we're going to die, no matter our age. We're all faced with mortality. It wasn't just something that we get to a certain age and all of a sudden we're thinking about when we're going to die. I think unless you're like a kid or a teenager, as soon as we're somewhere in our adult years, we think about it. And we're faced with our mortality when we can't do something we used to do. At 36, I really have a hard time admitting it, that I can't do certain things I did when I was 20. When you're 50, you can't do certain things you could do when you were 30, for the most part. When you're 80, you can't do the same things you did when you were 50. We all have this, from our own perspective, our fears of aging and mortality. I'm moving pretty well today, but just on Wednesday, I hurt my back, lifting weights, of course, and I've never hurt my back. Okay, in 20 years of lifting weights, I've been pretty lucky, never hurt my back before. And Wednesday night, I could not move. If you ever hurt your back, it's the worst, right? Like you cannot get comfortable. If it's like a limb, you can just like block it out, But if it's your back, you're always compressing your spine somehow. I could not get comfortable laying down, sitting, standing, no matter what. So I got real warmed up today so I could stand up here. But when that happened, I was so upset because one, was it a fluke or am I getting old? Okay. Was it my fault that I lift too much? Probably, but the weight was moving and it just happened. And I was so upset. And I was seriously though, I was doubly upset because of the day it happened. Wednesday, July 6th, was also the anniversary of my dad's death. And so I had that on my mind, and then I hurt myself. I'm like, this is just a bad day, And so I was reminded that he would have been 62 this year, and he died at 31. So he's been gone as long as he was alive. And then I am 36. My grandfather died at 72. So I have lived half as long, And so we all get these things in our head, right? Like it's hard for me to imagine that it's possible that I've lived half my life. Now, hopefully I'll live longer if I have a good and healthy life, but we all have these different perspectives and fears, right, of aging and dying. And so we have to move out of this. We have to somehow be okay with this process and learn to live. We have to learn to live. And so Ecclesiastes urges us to put behind once and for all the make-believe and to accept reality. Only then will we be the people and live fully into the lives that we're supposed to live. Solomon is telling us to stop pretending. Stop pretending that if we get the promotion at work or grow our retirement fund, that will feel significant and leave a lasting legacy. Stop pretending that if we change jobs or move to a new house that we still won't experience the ordinariness of life. Stop pretending that if we end one relationship and start a new one, we won't ever feel trapped. Stop pretending that if we're married or that we aren't married, we will be content. Stop pretending that if we had more money, we would be satisfied. Just stop pretending. This is the wisdom of Solomon as he writes Ecclesiastes. And this coming from a man who did it all. This coming from a man who was the wisest, the wealthiest. We're not going to talk about all the wives that he had, but the wisest, and because that was not wise. But he otherwise was wise and wealthy, and he did it all. All of this coming from the man who accomplished more than you and I put together. And he spends the better part of this book of Ecclesiastes telling us everything that he's done. He doesn't hold anything back. He's indulged in every success and every sin known to humankind. He has it all and he has done it all. And what does it all mean? Nothing. At least it means nothing when it is considered apart from God. Solomon concludes that everything under the sun is meaningless, and so what he proposes is that our view has to change. We must not see our lives from under the sun, but rather from the perspective of God. Solomon tells us that knowledge on its own only leads to sorrow. Ignorance is bliss, right? Indulgence in pleasure, laughter, sex, and money, and all are just a striving after the wind. And so after he indulges in all of the physical pleasures, he said he pursued wisdom, but soon realized that both the wise and the foolish end up the same place. So he threw himself into his work. They soon realized that his work would be placed into the hands of someone else after he died, that there would be another king. And then in the end, after his long search, he realized that there is nothing meaningful under the sun. Death comes to us all. And if this is true of the great and wise King Solomon, what does it mean for us? All of a sudden, I feel pretty insignificant. I feel pretty insignificant. What have I accomplished? Just a guy up here sharing these confusing words with all of you. And the fact of the matter is that nothing I have done except love on people matters. The fact of the matter is that my accomplishments and your accomplishments pale in comparison to King Solomon's accomplishments. And his accomplishments pale in comparison to the finality of death. And if our purpose and identity are in things and experiences, then we have no meaning at all. So where are you trying to find purpose in life? Where are you trying to find purpose in life? If all this is meaningless, where is the purpose? There is finally good news. Solomon doesn't end his thoughts in despair. He goes through this whole book. And finally, in the last chapter, he tells us this. Worship God and keep God's commandments, because this is what everyone must do. If he thought everything is meaningless, then he wouldn't have said this. He wouldn't have gone through this whole book sharing this unusual way of viewing life if worshiping God was not important. Worship God and keep God's commandments. And this is where we find Jesus in Ecclesiastes. Because Jesus, worshiping God, and Jesus is our meaning for living. And every step toward Jesus is a step away from meaningless. When Jesus was asked to give his opinion as to the greatest law, he responded with something similar to King Solomon. Jesus said, the greatest law is to love God with all that we are and to love our neighbors. He said that these two commands sum up all the law. He told his disciples in his last moments, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And so Jesus' commandments are summed up in the greatest commandment to love God and to love others. And so the whole duty and purpose of humanity, the meaning of life, is to keep these commandments and to love people, to love God and to love others. And so our purpose is not found in our biggest moments or our greatest failures. Solomon is right. These moments will pass. But our purpose is found in Jesus and in keeping his commandments. These are eternal purposes with eternal significance. Our purpose is to love God and to love others with all that we have and to die to ourselves. And in doing so, we're transformed. We're transformed by the love of Jesus. And so Jesus transforms your life from meaningless to meaningful. It's so simple. So simple. Knowing Jesus is your purpose, and it will transform otherwise meaningless moments into eternal moments. You mean something to God, and that alone is worth living. I'd like to invite Michael and Nate. We're going to move into a time of prayer, and as Mary Catherine said earlier, I can't say it all in a sermon. And so if you have questions or want to discuss this more, I encourage you to join the sermon team, or if you have questions for me, I'll be glad to talk to you. And so I would just invite you during this time of prayer to just contemplate where you're finding purpose. Those things that just aren't meaningful to your eternal life, to let them go and to find meaning in Jesus. And so you're encouraged to come up and light a candle, to lift up your prayers, to pray for other people, or to come to the kneelers. And we invite those at home to pray as well. So let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for these words of Solomon. And though they may at first be difficult to take in, to accept, God, we know that when we understand them, when we know where Solomon was going, and that when we are giving these words through the lens of Jesus Christ, that we can find meaning in you, and that our meaning in life is to love God and to love others. Let us set aside those things that hold no purpose to our eternal life. And so, God, be with these people as we continue to pray.